Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm a guest designer for color art and we will be making this mixed media card. The products that we'll be using today are Radiant Rain, Shimmering Mist, and Twinkling H2O, Shimmering Paints, Distress Ink, both ink pad and stain, as well as some Ranger fine detailed embossing powder. So let's get started. Alright, we're going to start with the background. This background is using the property of distress that reacts with water. Radiant Rain is a water-based product, so when it is used with distress, it will react. I'm directly applying the ink to the textured side of the watercolored paper and am going for complete coverage and saturation. I've speeded it up here to save some time. So here we are, completely saturated, and it will be set aside to dry. Now I'm adding some more ink to my craft sheet, and this will be misted with the correct color of Radiant Rain, and then the watercolor paper will be applied to absorb this ink. This is the basis for the embossed panel on the front. When I have it exactly so, it will be set aside to dry. Alright, here's our cardstock. Still a little damp. It doesn't need to be completely dry, but the ink should not come off on your fingers. So I'm going to use my heat tool to dry it up. Alright, now we're ready to start stamping. I'm going to use my Misty tool, cardstock, or rather watercolor paper, and then the stamp. This is a Hero Art stamp. The background clocks. I tried several stamps. They all work well. I just happen to be quite fond of this one. And if I can get my lid to stick, we will move on to inking this stamp up. Alright, now I'm going to directly apply the stain to the stamp. Now if I had just applied the stain and then stamped it onto the cardstock, it would be no different than inking up the stamp and stamping it. I wanted more of a shimmer effect, but I also wanted the images to be slightly blurred. So by adding the Radiant Rain to the stamping, the water formulation will react with the distress and will give me a shimmery effect, slightly blurred, almost that look that you get when you view water through glass. Here I'm adding the Radiant Rain, and this one is the Pearl Gold as well, and then carefully closing it over the paper. Now the inking needs to come in contact with that watercolor paper long enough to allow it to saturate and to activate the ink underneath. So I'm gently applying pressure, and now we'll gently remove the paper from the stamp. The shimmer mist puddles on top of the cardstock. And in this case, I did not want the shimmer mist to move or run, so I did not use a heat tool to set it. On other examples, I had used the heat tool and was able to move that ink across the cardstock. But in this case, I wanted more of a crisper image, if you will. You can see the shine. All right, now it's nearly dry. There's two small places that aren't, so I'm going to blot those up. There's shimmer in the actual clock faces, but not on the background itself. So I'm going to lightly mist this with the Radiant Raine, being careful not to over wet it as to activate the distress stain or ink. And once again, it will be set aside to completely dry. Now we need to move on to the clock face. Clock is also stamped onto watercolor paper, only this time I'm stamping it onto the smooth side. And here we are, all nicely embossed. I'm going to be using Twinkling H2O in pearl red, mustard seed, and Meridian. I've added water to these pots so that they are nicely saturated. And then getting some water. Will wet the face of my clock. Oh, oops. Well, I'll find something else to wet the face of my clock. There we go. I want this to be very soft. I'm trying to create a watch glass, so the center needs to be lighter and it needs to have almost a raised appearance. The edges being darker, the center being lighter. So I'm applying the mustard seed. Mustard seed is a browny gold, but when you add enough water, there's a slight green undertint that matches beautifully with this gold embossing. So now I've applied it. I'm going to blot it up because I'm really after just a shadow. And then just smoothing it out again. All right, now I'm going to use the pearl in the center. And this is going to be applied rather thickly to the center, so that I can get a nice rosy gold shimmer. And then I'll add some water and float it out to the edges, and that will help give that appearance of that oval or circular glass. All right, we're almost finished with the clock. Now this will need to be dried thoroughly before the clock hands can be stamped. And because of the way Twinkling H2Os are, you have to be careful applying heat. If you get too much heat too close, it will actually bubble. So I'm going to use a heat tool, but move it very quickly, not hold it in one place, and just enough to set that paint. All right, now we need to paint the outside. I'm going to apply a wash of water to the outside. Remember, we embossed this to form a resist, so when I drop this color, it will hit the embossing and not go into the center. The center is also dry, which prevents wicking. So I'm just blotting to achieve the right color saturation. Most of this will be cut away I'm just trying to get a hint of color around the outside with that little bit of shimmer that the Twinkling H2Os give. Alright, time to stamp those clock hands. Again, using my Misty and Archival ink. Since we're stamping over the Twinkling H2Os, we need a waterproof or an ink that's appropriate for a non-porous surface. I'll be gently stamping this, hoping not to mess up my beautiful clock. Alright, we're done. Alright, now we need to prepare the ribbon. I'm going to use the same mixture of Distress, Stormy Sky, Faded Jeans, Chipped Sapphire, and Pumice Stone to dye my ribbon. I placed the ribbon onto the dye, added some Radiant Raine, and I'm absorbing all of that ink into that ribbon and kneading it around. To intensify the color in places, I'm adding a bit more ink directly to the ribbon and then some Radiant Raine and kneading the color in. Alright, we're all finished. So while we were gone, I did some prepping. I fussy cut the clock and attached a bauble from the Tim Holtz Ideology line, and all of these will be linked in below the video. I stamped the word artiste and embossed it with the fine embossing powder and attached it to a gold mat. The paper that we prepared early on was cut to size and ran through my Big Shot with a clock embossing folder. The mat, the inked cardstock was cut to size, and then I cut a piece of gold foil and embossed that. I was after the embossed edges. The actual inside didn't matter, so I went for a folder that had some nice crinkly edges, and then I cut the cardstock. This card is slightly larger than an A2, measuring 4.5 by 5 3/4. The bow I tied 3 loop loosely floppy, I guess would be a better word, bow. I find that the bow needs to be a little asymmetrical, a little bit floppy for this type of card. When I attach my bows to the cards, I first attach the center, and then every loop is attached with a glue dot. This helps maintain the structure of the bow. The bow then is stable, it doesn't move. The loops seem to be a little more structured, and if the bow should become crushed, it doesn't misshapen as much. Alright, we're completely finished. So the products used in this video were Radiant Raine, Twinkling H2O, and Distress. Here's an example of another card that was created with this technique, only I used cardstock rather than an inked background. Thank you so much for allowing me to participate, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I am looking forward to further videos and